But let us also be aware Russia will need a stable and prospering Georgia beyond her borders for the sake of her own long-term security. So there seems to be, in my eyes, in some future, ground for a balanced political deal. And another word concerning Russia, conflict resolution in Georgia needs a dialogue between Georgia and Russia. And I think it is important that the current state of speechlessness, it's not only speechlessness, it's also personal defamation of politicians, will be overcome soon. And I come to another item, which is confidence building measures, or rather a systematic neglect of confidence building measures all along the peace process, which we have witnessed. And it starts in the time when I was still here. This refers to the conflict sides as much as to Russia. Incidentally, one of the greatest weaknesses of Russian foreign policy, in my eyes, is the virtual non-reliance on soft policy strategies and particular confidence-building measures. What do I mean by confidence-building measures? Well, I do not mean road building or even humanitarian actions, although they have certainly a strong confidence-building measure dimension. What I mean is reconciliation. Speak openly about the past. Admit your faults. I mean restoration of people-to-people contacts, restoration of dialogue on all possible levels. Now, there are those who say CBMs can wait until we have solved the political issues. I would strongly contradict. They have to proceed, or at least run parallel to the peace process. And we certainly will be aware that CBMs are a complement and not a substitute for political negotiations. But if things go well, CBMs do have a capacity to prepare the ground for compromise in the political field. At best, CBMs can contribute to reframing the attitudes not only of policy makers but of key sectors of the society. They can develop into a powerful tool to stop alienation, to help overcome patterns of antagonism and enmity. And for me, one of the main reasons for the tragedy of August 2008 is that the process on CBMs practically had come to a standstill ever since 2004. So we should not repeat these mistakes. Admittedly, there's one disturbing quality about confidence-building measures. They need patience and time. Their impact is gradual rather than immediate. And another remark in that context, as nowhere else, you will need a civil society contribution in your work on CBMs. In the past, there has been too much disconnect between the government level and the civil society. Another aspect that I would add to my list of deficits, and I would have some other additions, but let me turn to the second aspect of my presentation, the EU's role. Europe has definitely been a late comer to the conflict resolution in Georgia, but today it is the key international player at the expense of OSCE and UN, who both had their mandates discontinued after 2008. And Europe could have benefited from lessons learned, could have been mindful of the deficits which I have mentioned. And I think to some extent this is the case. I need not recapitulate here a complicated story on how the EU became involved in conflict settlement in the South Caucasus and in Georgia. It was certainly no straight way. You will be familiar with the main facts. Anyway, to sum it up, it was only after 2003 that the EU showed the political will to engage in this in conflict resolution in the South Caucasus. Since then, it has managed to work out an elaborate strategy and put in place a unique set of tools. I need not mention them here. It is political dialogue, it is confidence-building measures, it is humanitarian measures, but it is also socio-economic measures. And in itself, this is an impressive list. It illustrates a very broad approach that is practiced by the EU, based not only on security policy, but on economic and social considerations. Its ultimate guideline is to promote the democratic process in Georgia, strengthen good governance, institution building, rule of law, and thus help stabilize the country. Now this describes the ideal. Now let us come to the crucial point. Does the EU have a political vision for Georgia and the South Caucasus? One which is based on coherence, based on sustainability, and on a long-term commitment. On this matter, opinions tend to be still divided. There are those who assume that the EU in the long run will hardly be able to live up to the challenge. And they point to controversies concerning Caucasus strategies, which we have seen take place in the EU in a recent past. Very obviously, as I said, conflict resolution in Georgia will require time and patience, which is more than ever true after August 2008. And as we all know, political policies may change with time. Why should that not apply to the EU and its policy regarding the South Caucasus, which may be superseded by other political priorities? I would, however, recognize, on the other hand, a deep-rooted belief in Europe, and this is contrary to the 90s, when Europe was preoccupied with the Balkans, a deep-rooted belief in Europe that the South Caucasus is an essential part of Europe. That is our security, which is at stake in this region. That Europe cannot afford to leave the Caucasus to itself, that it cannot afford to take an active part in its stability, not an active part in its stabilization, including conflict resolution. That any change to this conflict would mean for the EU losing credibility with disastrous effects in other policy areas. I certainly would be in favor of this second position, and I'm sure it is this position which is going to prevail. Still, we should be prepared that the debate will go on in many ways. Here in Georgia, where you can often register feelings of resentment about the perceived half-heartedness of the EU in its actions. And you may be sure the day will never come when the EU will be able to meet all expectations in this country. But the debate will also go on inside the EU.